Thank you for listening to the previous podcast. In this episode, we will discuss the persistence of child marriage and de facto unions and their causal link with teen pregnancies. We will draw upon studies and academic commentary in demonstrating that these issues are not being sufficiently addressed by the international community. Firstly, the United Nations Population Fund, or UNFPA, stated that access to safe and voluntary family planning is a human right. We have already discussed family planning earlier, but I think it deserves another focus, as it is one efficient way not only to end AIDS by providing a more efficient health system, but also to solve other issues regarding sexual health. For example, if you focus on the topic of pregnancy, every woman should be able to choose to avoid, carry to term, or terminate her pregnancy. In this sense, women should have the right to access reliable contraceptive methods. For many women, these needs are not being met. Some women, especially adolescents, are sexually active and do not want to have children but do not use contraception. Currently, the UNFPA 2022 report concludes that nearly half of all pregnancies, totally 121 million each year throughout the world, are unintended.
But why then this situation persists?
The reasons are simple. Sometimes some women are unaware of the existence of different contraceptive methods, therefore a need to inform. In other cases, women simply do not have a choice about whether to use a contraceptive method. This is for cultural or religious reasons, therefore a need not to impose. The aim is not to impose, but to inform and let choose what they want or should not do.
So, can you tell us how can we describe child marriage and its impact on children's lives? How does this relate to family planning?
So first we can try to define child marriage. According to the UNFPA, it's a formal marriage or informal union before age 18. In this sense, it is interesting to note that child marriages can be legal marriages under the law. In Niger, for example, child marriages are addressed in family law, and according to the civil code, the minimum age of marriage is 18 for boys and 15 for girls. This Alliance and Al reported that in Chad and Niger, 60% of girls were married before the age of 18. Child marriage is also an informal union. Many do not know that child marriages can involve de facto union between two minors. Child marriage exists all over the world. In some countries, de facto unions are normalized by government. In Cabo Verde, for example, de facto unions are recognized at the age of 16 by the Cape Verdean Civil Code, provided that the person has been in a relationship with the other for 3 years. These different forms of child marriage affect both developed and underdeveloped countries. What is different is the extent of the problem in each country and the way in which public policies address the issues. Our goal is to raise awareness of this issue and encourage countries to revise their laws to prohibit child marriages, as the consequences are both harmful and long-lasting in terms of health, early pregnancies, unassisted abortion, or maternal death. Other consequences include economic insecurity, especially for young girls, increased risk of being a victim of domestic violence, being abused, or being poor. Today, child marriage is almost universally prohibited, which shows that there is progress, but there is still much to be done. Once again, raising public and governmental awareness of this issue helps to highlight the disastrous and long-term consequences of this practice on the life of children, especially young girls.
According to the UNICEF, child marriages between teenagers often lead to early pregnancies. What can we say about how governments deal with the issue of teenage pregnancy, and how will the separation between global north and global south.
In 2022, the United Nations Global Report on Family Planning indicated that 996 million women of reproductive age are using contraception worldwide. These numbers have doubled since the 1990s. This is due to public policies that facilitate access to contraceptives. In France, for example, several laws have been created to facilitate access to free contraception for young people under the age of 26, including minors. However, the United Nations Global Report on Family Planning also counted 164 million women who want to avoid pregnancy but do not have access to contraception. In some countries, access to contraception is difficult, which sometimes leads to unwanted pregnancies, especially among adolescents. It should be noted that this happens all over the world, in the north as well as in the south. Unfortunately, these problems are much more frequent in the south. The beginning of the first menstruation in young girls tends to influence child marriage or de facto unions. In general, in many societies, particularly in Africa and Asia, parents or spouses believe that the arrival of menstruation is a sign to have a child. Sexual activity is very high among 25% of women who have never married and are unmarried, primarily among women aged between 15 to 24 years. Singh and Darroch state that this is due to a combination of several factors, such as the early onset of first menstruation, the increasing age of marriage, and changing societal values on the subject. Despite this, in 2013, 25% of women in developing countries have a much harder time obtaining contraceptives and are extremely stigmatized if they become pregnant, despite changing societal values. In Senegal, Ngimana, a 17-year-old girl, said, "It is taboo to talk about sexuality. Sometimes there are programs on television about contraception, but young people don't pay attention to them. We talk about sex with each other, but we don't talk about it with our parents. Boys don't think to ask girls to take the pill or to use contraception." Ngimana's story is just one example of how not enough is being done to ensure access to the right to comprehensive, age-appropriate sex education. Despite all this, progress has been made since 2013. Dessalines et al. Argued that the adolescent fertility rate has fallen from 126 per 1,000 live births during 2000 to 2005 to 103 during 2015 to 2020. Similarly, they also argued that contraceptive prevalence among single women aged 15 to 24 years has risen from 23% in 1990 to 2000 to 33% in 2011 to 2015. This is because education has a significant influence on sexual health. Studies show that less educated girls began having sex 2.2 years earlier, married 4.4 years earlier, and had their first child 2.5 years earlier than girls with secondary or higher education. It is also observed that young men with more education marry 3.6 years later than those with less education.
So, do you think that education could be a solution to this problem?
Indeed, the same studies show that education has become less of a risk factor for HIV due to the greater use of preventive measures, such as reducing the number of sexual partners or using condoms, by more educated women and men. Also, with regard to education, even if girls become pregnant, there are back-to-school programs that allow them to complete their education and receive appropriate prenatal care. In Uganda, Phoebe, a 20-year-old girl, said, "When I was 17, I had a boyfriend in high school. I asked my friends about sex, and they told me that you can't get pregnant in the first 10 days after your period. I got pregnant anyway. My friend got scared and disappeared, and my parents wanted to kill me. Luckily, one of my teachers talked to my parents and explained that I could go back to school after I gave birth. At first, my parents didn't want to hear about it, but eventually they were convinced. Now I am 20 years old and I want to become a teacher. It would be nice if these issues were talked about more in high school so that girls don't make the same mistake I did." However, it is important to remember that global north countries are also affected by early pregnancy. Indeed, in the United States in the 1990s, it was found that 1 in 10 women aged 15 to 19 became pregnant each year. Nowadays, because of measures taken by the American government, the number of young girls who get pregnant has decreased a lot. whereas 3 decades ago, a quarter of 15-year-old girls became mothers before turning 20. The causes and consequences are the same as those mentioned in the opening questions. In other words, women who are less educated on the subject are the most likely to become pregnant and face issues of maternal and child poverty, difficulty in finding a job and continuing their education, etc. Also, in the United States, many reality shows, such as 16 and Pregnant, show that what these young girls go through on a daily basis. It is also a way to learn about the consequences of teenage pregnancy.
But what should or could be done to prevent teenage pregnancy?
The intention is once again to provide access to information. Is it essential to make people aware of this? Again, culture plays an important role and depends on societies and countries. Some people have a great influence on the propagation of information. To give you a concrete example, in some countries, religious institutions can strongly influence contraceptive measures. Our goal is to help states and governments improve their health performance and provide reliable contraception to all. Despite this, certain groups of people are still stigmatized, and that's what our next and final episode will talk about.